T9C got the fucking juice.
Silver's the new gold.
Chris is shit fun.
T9C got the fucking juice.
Silver's the new gold.
Chris is shit fun.
Yo, what's going on, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of JT Sports Live. I'm your host, JT. We got to talk about Bryce Young getting benched. I've heard a lot of opinions from people in the media that I strongly disagree with. And my thing is this. Don't act like you've been watching the Carolina Panthers. Because I've been watching this team for the last 2 years solely because of Bryce Young. And there's no way you can watch the Panthers play with him at quarterback and say that he's not part of the problem. So it is a little bit annoying to hear people like Shannon Sharp and Chad Ochocinco say that Bryce Young isn't the problem, the Panthers set him up to fail, when this offseason, they improved this supporting cast. They improved the offensive line. They brought in 2 really good interior offensive linemen. They improved the wide receiver position. And there's no way you can watch Bryce Young with how he played against the Saints in week 1 and last week against the Chargers and say that, yeah, he's not part of the problem. So I'm going to explain why the decision to bench Bryce Young was necessary. We also got to talk about the Baltimore Ravens. They're 0-2 right now, and it's do or die mode for them. They got the Cowboys up this week. They got the Bengals coming up as well, and there's a strong possibility that their season is over by the end of this month. LSU fans are strongly in denial about Brian Kelly. This dude is overrated. He's a fraud, and the Tigers are not going to win that many games this year, probably 8 wins at best. But LSU fans refuse to accept the truth about this dude. Tennessee versus Oklahoma is the game of the week in college football. I'm so excited about this game. We're going to be breaking it down, giving my predictions. Also going to be breaking down, giving predictions for USC versus Michigan. And I'm going to explain to you guys why Florida State and the University of Florida are struggling to have success despite having access to all the in-state talent that resides in the Sunshine State. And why are the Denver Broncos and Bo Nix struggling offensively? Shout out to everybody that's tuned in, wherever you're watching, YouTube, X. Do us a favor, smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, give us a follow, turn on post notifications so you don't miss when we drop new content and when we go live. We are not just a YouTube channel, we are a podcast. You can find us on Apple, Spotify, Amazon, wherever you get your podcast from. The JT Sports Podcast is a favor. Give us a 5-star review if you enjoy. I want to do a mailbag episode sometime this week, so you can send in your questions, college football, NFL, in the DMs on Instagram at JT Sports _ and on X at JT Sports __. I'm trying to get better with checking my DMs on both of these platforms. I'm somebody who doesn't really like to utilize a lot of social media, but I've been trying to get back active on it late. So go ahead, send your questions in. Shout out to everybody that's tuned in. Shout out Aaron M. He says, I feel bad for Bryce Young. He says, I will, however, say this, JT. Sorry for using God's name in vain, but if God dang things change with the new quarterback, then something is wrong with this organization. It all comes back to temper. Absolutely. Shout out Kate Roan with the $4.99 donation. She says, powerful JT Sports Live. 100% correct on Bryce Young. He is done. And I talked him up a lot, but I was wrong. Always appreciate you, man. I appreciate you with the donation. I appreciate you for always supporting the channel. And let's dive into it. Okay. As we already know, the Carolina Panthers have made the decision to bench former #1 overall pick Bryce Young in favor of Andy Dalton. And I've been listening to a lot of people in the national media talk about this decision. And a lot of people are throwing a pity party for Bryce Young. They are saying that he didn't deserve this. He needed more time to develop. Let me tell you guys something. Especially if you're Shannon Sharp or Chad Ochocinco when you're watching this. It's easy when you're on the outside looking in to say that this was the wrong decision. But if you're Adam Thielen and you're Deontay Johnson and you're constantly giving your all every single play, you're wide open several times and Bryce Young just doesn't see you or he just overthrows you by a mile, are you telling me that you're not going to get frustrated? Bryce Young got drafted into a horrible situation. We can all agree with that. When you get drafted #1 overall, however, you are expected to overcome situations like this. As messed up as it seems, #1 overall picks have to be able to elevate the situation that they're in. Nobody that gets drafted this high gets drafted into a completely great situation where they have it all. You got to be able to overcompensate for something. Joe Burrow, when he got drafted by the Cincinnati Bengals, in year 2, he took them to the Super Bowl. Yes, they did have great receivers, but that was one of the worst offensive lines in the modern Super Bowl era to ever make it to a championship game. Joe Burrow was able to win despite having a bad offensive line. Cam Newton was the heart and soul of the Carolina Panthers. He took them to the Super Bowl with Ted Ginn being his best wide receiver one year and won MVP that same season. Andrew Luck carried the Indianapolis Colts with T.Y. Hilton being his best receiver, not having a good run game, and always having a bad offensive line. When you are a first overall pick and you get drafted into situations like these, you can't expect to have it all. You have to be able to overcome limitations. And I know hindsight is 2020. It's easy right now to say that C.J. Stroud should have been the Carolina Panthers selection with that draft pick, considering everything that they gave up. But looking back upon it, it was the right decision. You know, in the sense of Bryce Young, when you think about what he did at Alabama, he was able to produce some incredible numbers, despite those Alabama teams not being as talented as what they've been in years past. However, Frank Wright, the head coach at the time when they drafted Bryce Young, never wanted this dude. He wanted C.J. Stroud. You see, back then, I thought that it was 1A, 1B. The Panthers couldn't go wrong taking either Bryce or C.J. Stroud. But really, with Bryce Young being so small in size, having his own limitations, he was never going to be able to overcome the dysfunction that he was walking into with this Panthers organization. C.J. Stroud is wired differently as a player and just mentally to where he could have elevated Carolina. C.J. Stroud has had the greatest rookie season that we've ever seen in the history of this league. He would have been a better fit for the current state of the Carolina Panthers than what Bryce Young is, because C.J. Stroud doesn't have size limitations. And with C.J. Stroud's mentality, he's just a dog. He comes from the trenches. He comes from the struggle. And I love people that have harsh upbringings because it builds character. It shows that you can overcome adversity. Bryce Young has never had to overcome adversity at any point of his playing career up until this point. He was the best quarterback out of high school at Mater Dei. That was the best high school football team in all of the nation when he played. He went to Alabama, got coached by Nick Saban. There's never really been a lot of adversity that Bryce Young has had to overcome, which is why his confidence has been completely ruined. When you watch Bryce Young play, you're not seeing a player that's throwing the football with a high level of confidence in himself. You see somebody that's scared. You see somebody that second guesses himself. And the longer the Panthers continue to allow this dude to start, the worse he was going to get, because the more he continued to make mistakes, the less confidence he was going to have. And at this point, Bryce Young is worse than what he was last year, with the Panthers giving him a better supporting cast. And you can't lie and say that Bryce Young didn't deserve to get benched if you've watched the Panthers play these first two games of the season. Look, I was a huge Bryce Young defender. I've watched the majority of his games with the Panthers. But a lot of people in the national media got to stop making it seem like Bryce Young hasn't been given a better situation this year. And a lot of people in the media got to stop making it seem like they've watched the Carolina Panthers play. Because let's be honest, the Panthers are probably the last team that you're ever going to want to watch a game of. I'm not a fan of this team, but I've watched a good amount of them over the last 5 to 6 years, just because growing up in Florida, if the Jaguars weren't on TV, the two teams that I was always watching, because I didn't really have a lot of cable television, so I was watching games on the antenna. So if the Jaguars weren't on, I was either watching the Buccaneers or the Carolina Panthers. That's why I was such a big fan of Cam Newton. He's my favorite NFL player of all time. And I've never seen a Panthers quarterback play as bad as what I've seen out of Bryce Young. And, you know, over the course of this offseason, I've gone to war for Bryce Young. I went at it with my dude, Unc 2020, and he got mad at me. He currently got me blocked right now because, you know, I said that Bryce needed more time. And, you know, thinking back upon it, I understand why he was frustrated. Because, you know, if you really watch the Carolina Panthers play, you would know that Bryce Young isn't it. He has no awareness. He's running into offensive tackles. He can't throw in the middle of the field. Anytime Bryce Young has to throw in the middle of the field, something bad is destined to happen. The same interception that he threw against the Chargers last week was the same two interceptions that he threw in the New Orleans Saints. They all came in that same area of the field. Bryce Young just doesn't have the ability to see over his offensive line to the point where he can become an effective quarterback when you ask him to throw inside of the numbers. When Bryce Young was at his best at Alabama, there were a lot of plays that he made outside the pocket. When things broke down, he was able to make those big throws outside of the numbers. Same thing with Russell Wilson and some of the other smaller quarterbacks that you've seen play this game. The difference between Kyler Murray and Bryce Young is that although they both have the same size, Kyler Murray is one of the best athletes in the NFL. He has a strong arm, and he also has the ability to make guys miss, and he probably runs 4.4, 4.5. Bryce Young, when he was coming out of Alabama, was considered to be a point guard. He was supposed to be a smaller version of what Drew Brees was. He didn't have a great arm, but he threw with great anticipation, great accuracy, and he was great throwing on the run. Everything that made Bryce Young a great prospect out of Alabama, we haven't seen throughout his time being the Panthers quarterback. And if you're Dave Canales and you know that you have a owner that's very impatient and you have a locker room that's getting frustrated with bad quarterback play and you got fans who are booing the product that they're seeing on the field, you have no choice but to make this move. Even if David Temper was the dude who decided to pull the plug on Bryce Young, it wasn't a bad decision because the Carolina Panthers, to be honest with you, are just downright unwatchable to play or unwatchable. You know, it's hard to watch a full 4 quarters of Carolina Panthers football. Watching the Carolina Panthers play is like pulling teeth. And I'm not trying to be dramatic when I say that. If you watch the Panthers play, you will understand what I'm talking about. It is torture to watch this team play for 60 minutes. You know, there are a lot of better things that you can do with your Sunday other than watching the Carolina Panthers play like dog crap week after week. Bryce Young, it's not all his fault why his career has gone the way that it has. But at the same time, what made him special at Bama, we haven't seen with the Panthers. And the more you continue to start him, the more you continue to sour the locker room. Adam Thielen, Deontay Johnson have kind of already started to turn on Bryce. And for guys like Shannon Sharp and Chad Ochocinco, if you were to play for a quarterback who was this bad, would you still be saying that Bryce Young never should have gotten benched? Would you still be saying that Bryce Young needed more time? It's easy to say this when you're on the outside looking in. But if you're a player, I would be going to Dave Canales and I would say, look, if you want to keep starting Bryce Young, just go ahead and trade me. Adam Thielen probably only has about a year or two left of playing in the NFL. You think that he wants to spend his final playing days not being able to get the football because Bryce Young is just completely inept at being able to throw it to him? Come on now. Let's be serious. If you have really watched the Carolina Panthers play, you will understand just how bad Bryce Young has been. And a lot of the issues that people keep trying to point out, oh, he has a bad offensive line, he has no receivers, it's BS. Xavier Legette was a first-round pick. They drafted Jatavian Sanders out of Texas. They traded for Deontay Johnson. They have a better supporting cast around Bryce Young than what people are giving them credit for because they're not watching the Carolina Panthers. And now thinking about it, and listening to people in the media defend this decision, saying that Bryce Young never should have gotten benched, I understand why my dude Unc 2020 was so frustrated with me. Because really, if you do watch Bryce Young play for the Panthers, there's no way you can justify him remaining the starter. There is no development with him. He was never going to get better. He was only going to get worse because the more he continued to play, the less confidence that he had in himself. At this point, it would be and Bryce's best decision and his organization's best decision, or best interest, to just go ahead, bench him, and then even if Andy Dalton isn't that good, eventually if Bryce Young has to play again, maybe when he comes back out, he'll have more confidence in himself. You know, maybe he can look at himself in the mirror, reflect on what's going wrong, and make some changes that's needed. Because right now, this is not a dude who even looks good enough to be a backup. The problem with Bryce Young is that he already had to deal with the limitations of him being undersized. Now you put him on an organization where he has to deal with nothing but limitations. C.J. Stroud should have been the selection over Bryce Young when you think about it. Because C.J. Stroud was better equipped to handle the situation that the Carolina Panthers are. You can't say that no quarterback would have ever been able to succeed because of what has transpired with Sam Darnold and Baker Mayfield and all of the other previous quarterbacks that have played for this organization. You see, when you have journeyman QBs like Sam Darnold and Baker Mayfield, just because they're having success in different situations, doesn't necessarily mean that the Panthers are all of the problem. You know, Baker Mayfield, if he is as good as what people are trying to make out and people are trying to make it seem like the Panthers were the reason why he struggled, why did the Cleveland Browns get rid of him? Sam Darnold has bounced around to a lot of teams over these last couple of years. He's a former top 10 pick. It has taken him his 8th year in the NFL to finally be in a halfway decent situation and to play some good football. You know, like, as bad as the owners, what David Tepper is, Bryce Young isn't good. And even if you were to sit Bryce Young, there's still no guarantee that he still would have panned out. Trey Young sat a year behind Jimmy Garoppolo, and he still was a bust. I have a hard time understanding why Bryce Young has looked so bad when he looked so great at Alabama. And those Alabama teams were not as talented as what you people think. That kind of annoys me, how y'all just think just because somebody played for Alabama, he just had a great situation. Bryce Young carried those Bama teams. When he left for the NFL, Nick Saban fired his entire coaching staff. You know why? Because he said we were too Bryce Young dependent. The Carolina Panthers, his rookie season, they ruined his confidence so bad to the point going in a year or two, you know, he just was doubting himself. He was second-guessing everything, and that's why he had to be benched in favor of Andy Dalton. You can't allow the rest of the team to suffer because of one dude. He can't even complete, you know, more than 50% of his passes. He can't even throw for more than 100 yards in a game. He can't diagnose the blitz. I understand why people feel the way they do about Bryce Young because they remember how good he was at Alabama. Alabama only lost when Bryce Young wasn't on the field. He was probably the best quarterback that Alabama ever had. But at the same time, though, it's hard to watch the Carolina Panthers play and not say that Bryce Young is part of the problem. This is a better team than what he had to work with last year. He had a head coach who was responsible for resurrecting Geno Smith and Baker Mayfield. And Dave Canales isn't obligated to give Bryce Young a lot of time to improve because this wasn't the quarterback who he drafted. Put yourself in his shoes. If you're Dave Canales and you know that you have a Looney Tune as a owner, you have a lunatic owner, are you going to wait 6 to 8 weeks for Bryce Young to figure it out and risk getting fired midway through the season? Or are you just going to go ahead, give up on him, and start Andy Dalton, who may give you a better chance to win? I would go with option 2. You don't have a lot of time in the NFL to figure it out anymore. I understand what Tom Brady was saying when these young quarterbacks need to sit. But at the end of the day, the NFL is a production-driven business. And if you don't produce, you don't have a lot of time to turn things around. Kenny Pickett got traded after 2 seasons with the Pittsburgh Steelers. The Steelers are one of the best-ran franchises in the NFL, and even Kenny Pickett was a bust with them. So if Kenny Pickett can be a bust on an organization as well-ran as what the Steelers are, so can any other quarterback in any other situation. Not every quarterback that gets drafted first overall deserves to be drafted that high. When you get drafted in a spot like that, you're not going into a great situation. You have to be able to overcome some kind of limitations, and Bryce Young couldn't do that. He was a smaller, more athletic version of what Tua Tagovailoa is. This was never the best situation for him. The best situation probably would have been going to the Houston Texans or going elsewhere to an organization that wasn't as dysfunctional as what the Panthers are. But the Panthers have always been dysfunctional ever since they pretty much came into the league, outside of making it to the Super Bowl a couple of times. Like, when you think of the Carolina Panthers, you think of Cam Newton. Cam Newton has been the heart and soul of this franchise. And now that he's gone, you can see how bad things have been ever since, because he truly was Superman to the Carolina Panthers. Cam Newton was a different kind of quarterback. We've never seen a quarterback that had the size that Cam had, nor the athleticism that he had. He carried Auburn in one season to a BCS national title. Everywhere Cam Newton has gone, he's won. And with the Carolina Panthers, you had the most physically gifted quarterback that ever played this game. So, of course, you were going to have your best years when Cam Newton was at the helm at quarterback. That's the kind of quarterback that Carolina needed to succeed with how dysfunctional this franchise has been over these last couple of years. Bryce Young isn't that. Frank Wright wanted C.J. Stroud for a reason. And yet, David Tepper overruled him and said, no, I don't care if you want C.J. Stroud. You're going to go ahead, you're going to draft Bryce Young, and you're going to find a way to make it work. There's a lot of reasons for why Bryce Young's career has turned out the way that it's been. But I feel this decision, the benching, was justified because he was not going to improve. And all he was going to do was further frustrate the receivers on the team. You can't say if you're Chad Ochocinco and you're Shannon Sharp that this was the wrong decision when if this was you playing on the Carolina Panthers and you had to deal with this bad quarterback play, you would be singing a different tune. Chad Johnson played with Carson Palmer. Shannon Sharp played with numerous good quarterbacks. He was on numerous good teams, but if he had to play with a bad quarterback and he had to put up with this bad performance for 18 straight games, I promise you they wouldn't have the same attitude that they have right now. You know, Adam Thielen was frustrated. He threw his helmet on the sideline after one series last week. Deontay Johnson was ignoring Bryce Young when Bryce was trying to talk to him. This is a team that has turned on Bryce Young, not because he's a bad dude. He's a very likable guy. He always says the right thing at the podium. But at the same time, when you're not producing on the field, people's patience are going to run out with you. It's a team sport, but yet the quarterback position has the biggest impact on the wins and the losses. And if you have a great quarterback, he can win with not having it all. Patrick Mahomes won a Super Bowl despite not having a great group of wide receivers. And last year was the worst team that Kansas City ever had under the Mahomes, Andy Reid era. Great quarterbacks can win despite not having always great teams. Cam Newton took a Carolina Panthers team to the Super Bowl that had Ted Ginn as their best receiver. Come on now. Bryce Young was never meant to be put in a situation like this because he could never overcome it. You know, Bryce Young deserved to get benched. And I love Bryce Young. I want the brother to succeed. I still root for Bryce Young. But right now, he just isn't it. I don't know what's going wrong between him making the transition from college to the NFL. I never would have thought Bryce Young would have been this bad. This is one of the biggest surprises that I've ever had when it's come to evaluating quarterbacks. I wasn't surprised that Mac Jones and Zach Wilson didn't work out. Same thing with Trey Lance and Justin Fields, but I really expected Bryce Young to be special. I really did. But the Panthers just were a situation that Bryce wasn't cut out for. And this is the first time in his life where he's ever had to deal with some adversity when he's dominated at every level. High school, best player at his position coming out. You know, he won the Heisman at Alabama. C.J. Stroud was just wired differently. And I really believe if they drafted C.J. Stroud, they would be in a better spot than what they are right now with Bryce Young. But listen, man. There's no way you can watch Bryce Young play if you're actually watching the Carolina Panthers and say that he deserved to remain the starter, man, because it was hard to watch 3/4 of the Panthers play these past 2 weeks, man. And I'm not a Panthers fan, but I got a lot of respect for Carolina fans that tune in to watch this poor product week after week because it's just completely impossible to watch a full game of Carolina Panthers football. So I'm not about to believe that these people in the national media are quite informed with the situation that Bryce Young was in. The offensive line doesn't have anything to do with Bryce Young overthrowing wide open wide receivers. There were plenty of sacks that Bryce Young has taken that weren't on the offensive line. There was a play when he was getting outside the pocket. He held on to the football too long and he got popped. He just has no awareness. If you watch Bryce play these past 2 weeks, there's no way you can say with a straight face that he should have remained the starter, especially with the frustration that was starting to boil over in this locker room when it came to him being the starter. He deserved to get benched. Bo Nix has had a really slow start to his NFL career. And not only is Bo Nix struggling, but the Denver Broncos' entire offense is struggling. And I'm surprised that this offense has looked as bad as what it's looked this early into the season, because Sean Payton is one of the greatest offensive minds in the history of the NFL. He was winning with Jameis Winston. He was winning with Teddy Bridgewater. He was able to resurrect Drew Brees' career when the San Diego Chargers kicked him to the curb. But watching Sean Payton call plays this year, it looks like the game is starting to pass him by a little bit. Because normally, when you think of Sean Payton's offenses, a lot of people think it's all about just throwing the football around, getting the ball out fast, throwing a lot of short passes, when Sean Payton has always been the coach who's liked to establish the run game. And the Denver Broncos are not committed to running the football this year. They'll try to run the football early, but when it doesn't work, then they'll just go all air raid. They'll just go pass heavy. And you can't win games asking your rookie quarterback in his first couple of starts throwing the football 40, 35 times to win against two of the NFL's premier defenses in the Seattle Seahawks with Mike McDonald, who is compared to be the Sean McVay of defensive coaches, and the Pittsburgh Steelers, which we know how good the Steelers defense always is on a year-to-year basis. For the Denver Broncos to fix their offensive struggles, they got to remain committed to the ground game. It's not like the Broncos have been in games when they just have been getting blown out. They get down 3-4 touchdowns and they got no choice but to throw the football to get back in it. Against Seattle, that was a fairly close game. You still were able to be patient with the ground game. You didn't have to get off it as fast as what you did. Same thing against the Pittsburgh Steelers. You got to be committed to the run even when you're not having success at running the ball, because eventually you can pop off one or two good runs. And Bo Nix should be more involved in the ground game than what he is. When he got drafted in the first round, why I was so high on him is because he was going to a head coach that was going to be able to be a little bit more creative in terms of his play calling, because Bo Nix is really athletic. He runs like 4.5, 4.4. So you should see more read options, more designed quarterback runs that help improve this rushing attack. And that's why I thought that Bo Nix was going to be better than what he has shown his first couple of starts. You know, Sean Payton wants to be able to get the most out of Bo Nix this season. He has to ask more of him on the ground. You know, the Broncos are not a team this year with how bad their offensive line has looked and the lack of talent that they have at wide receiver, where they can just ask Bo Nix to win games having to throw the ball 30, 40 plus times to win. This is not winning football that the Broncos are playing with Bo Nix at quarterback. Their defense has been lights out. There's no reason why the ground game should just be given up on this early into games. You know, Sean Payton is going into the second half of games just completely saying, F running the football, we're just going to air it out. Let's get back to establishing the run game. Let's take some of the pressure off of Bo Nix. And what a lot of people have to understand is that not every rookie quarterback lights the world on fire their first couple of starts. Normally, you will see rookie quarterbacks start to play better around their fourth, fifth game in the NFL. CJ Stroud, as good as what his rookie season was, he wasn't that great his first 2-3 games. You know, it kind of took him a while to get things going. For Bo Nix, it's going to take him a while because it is an adjustment when you're going from college to the NFL, not with the speed of the game, but with how you're getting the play calls in. When you're getting plays in college, the terminology is probably only 2-4 words long at max. In the NFL, the plays that you have to call in are like a sentence long. It's a lot to memorize. It's a lot to digest. Of course, the transition is going to be a little bit hard at first. But the more Bo Nix continues to play, the better he should get throughout the season, which is why there's no reason to give up on Bo Nix this early and label him a bust. People are so quick to call guys bust, but yet they want to make excuses for when guys end up struggling when we've seen them throughout 18, 19 games. You know, Bo Nix isn't in that bad of a situation. It's just that he has a head coach that quite frankly, has never had a rookie quarterback before. I don't think Sean Payton quite understands how you go about easing a rookie quarterback into the NFL. And it kind of is disappointing, but this is his first time ever working with a quarterback this young and this inexperienced. And not only is Bo Nix learning, but Sean Payton is learning how to maximize getting the most out of a guy like Bo Nix with him being so young into his career. Just because you have a lot of starts in college football, I don't really think that translates that much to the NFL, because you could start 4 or 5 years in college and then still be terrible once you get to this level, because the game is just completely different. The field is shorter, it's more condensed. That's why this game speed is so faster compared to what you see at a collegiate level. The Denver Broncos need to stay committed to the ground game, even when they're not having success with it. And they need to get Bo Nix more involved in that department if they want to turn their season around, because their defense has showed up. Their defense looks way better than what it did last year. And it's surprising because their defense doesn't have a lot of household names. So it's not like the Broncos are getting blown out and they got no choice but to throw the football to get themselves back into these games. Sean Payton needs to be more patient with the ground game. He just gets off it way too fast, and you're putting too much pressure on a guy like Bo Nix to win these games. Yeah, he has made some boneheaded decisions, but there's been plays when Bo Nix has flashed, and as long as Sean Payton can find a way to adjust his play calling, which I believe that he will, because he did the same thing with Russell Wilson. When he figured out that Russell Wilson wasn't a good fit in his offense, he kind of transformed his offense to be a little bit more Russell Wilson-centric. And although it wasn't great to watch at times, he still got the most out of Russ. So, this is going to be a season where Broncos fans probably are not going to see the playoffs. And it probably is going to be a lot of ugly losses due to the growing pains that comes with having a rookie quarterback. But Sean Payton has to do a better job of adapting his scheme to his quarterback, because I don't get why you would have a guy like Taysom Hill. You were so effective at utilizing his athleticism, but you're just going to kind of limit Bo Nix to just throwing the football, and you're not going to utilize what made him so good at Oregon. What made him good at Oregon wasn't just he was good playing within structure, but he also could make things happen out of structure, and he was really good running the football. Sean Payton needs to get back to the staples of his offense. Sean Payton's offense wasn't all about Drew Brees. It was all about establishing the ground game as well. That's kind of the principles that the West Coast offense is built upon. You use the ground game to open up the pass, and then you try to get play action going. Then you get those bootlegs going when you get Bo Nix outside the pocket. So that's the problems that I think that the Broncos have offensively that they need to fix. Sean Payton has to stop being so impatient with the ground game, give it a little bit more time to get going before he just completely fades it and just tells Bo Nix, hey, go win me the game, because that's what Sean Payton has been doing. You're asking him to throw the ball 45, 35 times in his first 2 starts. You're telling Bo Nix, I need you to win this game. That's not a winning formula when you got a rookie quarterback, regardless of how much experience he had coming out of college. The Baltimore Ravens are 0-2. Losing to Kansas City wasn't that surprising, but losing to the Las Vegas Raiders really caught me off guard. And with this loss, the Ravens find themselves in a really bad position, because it's do or die now for them. Right now, you are in last place in the AFC North, tied with the Cincinnati Bengals. We know that the Bengals always get out the slow starts. They are going to turn it around eventually. But for Baltimore, you can't say the same. Your next 3 games, you got to go up against the Cowboys in Jerry's World, the Buffalo Bills, and you play the Cincinnati Bengals on the road. There's a strong chance that Baltimore could end up being 0-5 once we get into the month of October, and their season could be all but over at that point. Things have to change in Baltimore. You got to find a way to fix that offensive line. That right side of that old line is absolute garbage. They were getting obliterated against Kansas City, and they were getting obliterated last week against Max Crosby. Marlon Humphrey, he's not a shutdown cornerback anymore. I'm not going to say that Marlo needs to give up the podcast, but he definitely has to improve his play because he has definitely regressed these last couple of years. He's not the cornerback that he used to be. And it isn't just Marlon Humphrey who has regressed. You know, one player on the Ravens who people seem to never give any criticism to is Justin Tucker. He hasn't been that good. He's missed a field goal in 2 straight games. He missed a big field goal against Kansas City, and he missed another field goal last week against the Las Vegas Raiders. We need to hold Justin Tucker accountable as well. He hasn't been playing good. The Ravens are not playing their best football right now. And it's scary because this early into the season, this team does not look like a Super Bowl team. And I question if they're even going to make it to the playoffs because regardless of how good Lamar Jackson is, you're not going up against inferior teams. It's not like you're playing against the Carolina Panthers or any of the other worst teams in the NFL. You're going up against some of the best of the best. And if you don't bring your A game and you're just solely dependent on Lamar Jackson to make up for all your inefficiencies, you're going to miss the postseason. John Harbaugh, as long as he's been with the Baltimore Ravens, this is probably going to end up being one of the worst seasons that he has had in his coaching tenure with this organization and with Lamar Jackson because this just isn't a good team. They don't look well coached. They are heavily penalized. They had a lot of penalties against the Kansas City Chiefs. They had even more penalties, it seemed like, against the Las Vegas Raiders. And the offensive play calling last year was great out of Todd Monken. This year, the play calling hasn't been that good. Derrick Henry is a north and south runner. You run him in between the tackles. You don't run him outside the tackles. He's not an off-tackle running back. So I was really surprised at how many outside runs they were dialing up for Derrick Henry. Those are runs that you should be dialing up for Justice Hill or some of the speed running backs that you have. Not a dude like Derrick Henry who's made his career being a north and south runner and running over guys through the middle of the defense. The Baltimore Ravens, it's do or die mode for them. You're 0-2. You drastically need to turn this thing around. As good as what Lamar Jackson is, unless this dude just goes Super Saiyan mode, Super Saiyan blue, the Ravens don't have a chance of being a playoff team this year because they got way too many inefficiencies that Lamar Jackson has to make up for. And as good as what Lamar is, he can't make up for a complete shit show like what we've been seeing out of the Ravens these last couple of weeks. There's no reason why you should have blew that lead to the Las Vegas Raiders. But you did because your offense started out late in that game because you couldn't protect Lamar. You couldn't stop Max Crosby. It's just, this season, Lamar Jackson probably could end up winning MVP again if the Ravens make it into the playoffs because he really has to do everything. And that's why I've been so critical of John Harbaugh and his coaching staff. You see, the people in the media make it seem like Lamar Jackson is the reason why the Ravens keep coming up short in the postseason when it's on the coaching. Lamar wasn't the dude who only handed the football off to the running backs 5 times against the Kansas City Chiefs in the AFC Conference Championship game. Lamar Jackson wasn't the dude responsible for having Justice Hill blocking Chris Jones the final play against the Chiefs in week 1. There are some serious coaching concerns that need to be addressed with Baltimore. They need a reality check. They need to go in the mirror and reevaluate themselves as a coaching staff and as collective because their philosophy coming into this season is not working. You're asking Lamar to do more than what he ever has throughout this point of his career. I've never seen Lamar run so much and be so physical to the point where you wonder if he's even going to be able to hold up for the entirety of this season. People already try to call Lamar Jackson injury prone, so therefore, why are you asking Lamar Jackson to run so much? Lamar Jackson is putting his helmet down and he's running through guys. He's just saying, I'm trying to get it all. I'm trying to make sure that I can score as many touchdowns as possible because he realizes that he has to play this way because this team this year just is not that good. You know, I love John Harbaugh, but there gets a time when people overstay their welcome. And John Harbaugh is in the same situation that Mike Tomlin's in. They've been the head coach of their respective franchises for so long that their message has kind of started to become stale, and their methods of coaching have started to become a little bit outdated. John Harbaugh, the only reason he still is the head coach of Baltimore is because Lamar saved his job. And he's done a great job of building around Lamar, helping develop him by giving him good offensive coordinators like Greg Roman and Todd Monken. But eventually, we are starting to reach the point when Lamar has started to overtake the master in a sense. It's like now the Ravens need a head coach that can get more out of Lamar, that's a little bit more hands-on offensively. Imagine if Ben Johnson, the Detroit Lions offensive coordinator, became the head coach of Baltimore. Him and Lamar Jackson probably would be unstoppable. That would be diabolical for the rest of the league. The Ravens don't have a lot of time to right what is a sinking ship right now. Your schedule is not easy. You do have a couple of gimmies in there. You get to play the Washington Commanders and whatnot, but if you don't turn things around, you can find yourself out of the playoff mix by the time we get into November. Because right now, this is a team that, yeah, they are talented, but to lose to the Raiders is concerning. And you got games against the Cowboys. You got to play the Cincinnati Bengals as well and the Buffalo Bills. All three of those teams have the ability to beat you, and you could easily find yourself 0-5, which is why it's do or die for Baltimore. Before we move on to the college football section of this show, do me a favor, if you're listening on podcasting platforms, you're not listening live, give us a 5-star review, share the pod with your friends, family members, and acquaintances. If you're listening live on YouTube and X, like the stream, share it, give us a follow on X, subscribe to the channel if you're new on YouTube, turn on post notifications so you don't miss when we go live and drop new content. Remember, we are not just a YouTube channel, we are a podcast. You can find this episode and all of our previous ones on Apple, Spotify, Amazon, wherever you get your podcast from. The JT Sports Podcast is available. Oklahoma is about to kick off their first game as the official member of the SEC at home, hosting the Tennessee Volunteers. The Sooners are a 7-point underdog heading into this game. And it seems like many people are betting heavy on Tennessee to win this game and to cover that 7-point spread. But I want to warn y'all about doubting the Sooners. Under Brent Venables, Oklahoma is 13-2 at home. And this is going to be a very entertaining game to watch from the standpoint of you got two head coaches who are phenomenal on their ends of the football. Josh Heupel, the head coach of the Vols, is one of the best offensive minds in the sport. Brent Venables is one of the best defensive minds in the sport. So which side of the ball for these respective coaches is going to come out on top? We're going to see a chess match. You're going to have Brent Venables' defense versus Josh Heupel's offense. Which one is going to be able to be the victor in this game? Because Nico Iamaleava, this true outstanding redshirt freshman quarterback for Tennessee, he's been outstanding up to this point of the season. But this is the biggest test that he's had. You know, you're going on the road in a hostile environment that is playing in Norman. And it's not easy to win here. And Nico hasn't played against a team as talented as what Oklahoma is. And this is what people often overlook about Oklahoma. Although they are coming from the Big 12, Oklahoma has always been ready for the SEC because of how well they've recruited. Under Brent Venables, they have recruited at a top 10 level every single season. And they got an outstanding secondary. You got Billy Bowman. You got a very good linebacker in Danny Stutzman. And best believe that Brent Venables, he's going to be sending a lot of aggressive looks at Nico Iamaleava's way. And Tennessee does have a really good offensive line, but what makes Tennessee's offense so hard to stop is how much they can generate big plays and the vertical passing game downfield with ease. With this air raid offense, no huddle, it's the fastest offense in college football. Brent Venables is going to try to do his best to disrupt the timing and the rhythm of Tennessee's offense. And with how aggressive Brent Venables likes to call his defenses, I wonder how Nico Iamaleava is going to handle the aggressive style of defense that Oklahoma is going to be throwing up on the field against him, because he's never gone up against a defense this tough. Iowa in the bowl game doesn't count. This is a different animal that is Brent Venables, and now he's going to be able to run the style of defense that he was running when he was such a great defensive coordinator for Clemson. That's something that needs to be looked out for. And Oklahoma has experienced ball hawking secondary. They were one of the best teams in the nation last year at forcing turnovers. So I'm really excited to see Tennessee's offense against Oklahoma's defense. You got Brent Venables, Josh Heupel going head-to-head. Who's going to be the victor in this head-to-head matchup between these two masterminds when it comes to the respective sides of the football? Because Tennessee's deep at receiver, but Oklahoma's deep in the secondary. So who's going to come up on top? And then when you look at Oklahoma's offense versus Tennessee's defense, what concerns me about Oklahoma offensively is their offensive line, because Tennessee is walking in here with one of the best defensive lines in college football. Not only do they have a lot of talent on their D-line, but they got a lot of depth at that position as well, where they can rotate guys in and keep them fresh. But if Oklahoma's offensive line can hold up and they can keep Jackson Arnold upright, I like Oklahoma's chances of being able to have a great game offensively, because Tennessee's biggest weakness is their secondary. And when you have an offense that runs the amount of plays that Tennessee does, this defense can get gassed really fast. And although they do have talent up front, if you can neutralize those guys and keep guys like James Pierce Jr. off of Jackson Arnold, then he could carve up Tennessee's questionable secondary. Oklahoma has a lot of great skill guys. They are deep at wide receiver, and I love the running back Gavin Sawchuk. Not only is it a fun name to say, but this dude is lightning in a bottle. Not only does he have a good blend of elusiveness and power, but he's pretty good when it comes to catching the football out of the backfield as well. And I believe if Oklahoma is going to win this game against Tennessee, Gavin Sawchuk is going to be a major reason why. Because if Oklahoma's offensive line plays well and they can get that ground game going, they can wear down that Tennessee defense to the point where every time they touch the football, they can milk the clock and keep that offense off the field. You see, that's the kind of style that you got to have when you're going up against Tennessee's offense. If you can keep them off the field and you can play bully ball with them, then you can kind of neutralize how effective that offense is, because that offense can score really fast. We know that. But at the same time, running an offense that way tires out your defense. So therefore, if Oklahoma can get out to a big lead early, let's say it's 14-0, and Oklahoma can just go to the ground game and they just can churn out long drives that are like 7-8 minutes long, regardless of how fast Tennessee can score, if you can't keep Oklahoma from having success on the ground, they can dominate you when it comes to TOP. And regardless of how fast you score, it's going to be hard to win a ball game where you have to make every drive offensively count. Because if you can't stop Oklahoma's ground game, they're going to end up having a lot of time to just slow down your defense, wear those guys out, and that's where Tennessee can find themselves in trouble. Jackson Arnold. I love this dude. I love him just as much as I love Nico Iamaleava. As a matter of fact, they both come out of the same recruiting class. They were both highly touted recruits coming out of high school. Jackson Arnold was the Gatorade Player of the Year. And unlike Nico Iamaleava, you know, he's been kind of up and cold up to this point. You know, he had a really good game against Tulane, but the week before he didn't really look so hot. So the thing with Jackson Arnold is that you want to get him hot early, because he's a very streaky player. Sometimes he can start the game out really cold and then heat up later. Tennessee is not one of those teams where you can wait to play your best football. You got to be able to come out hot and strike where the iron is hot early. And for Jackson Arnold, if you can take care of the football, I love your chances of being able to have a good game, because that's really the biggest issue with Jackson Arnold. Like, he doesn't really have any accuracy problems. His problem comes with decision making. Sometimes he doesn't really make the best decisions. Sometimes he'll force balls into places that they don't need to be in. No pun intended, no homo, no diddy. Don't take that the wrong way. But Jackson Arnold has the ability to open things up for Oklahoma offensively against a really good Tennessee defense because of how good of an athlete he is. Nico Iamaleava is a really good athlete, but I think Jackson Arnold is better just because he's a more physical runner. I think he's more elusive in the open field as well. He has better vision. So if you can get Jackson Arnold hot early and you can get this offense rolling and, along with the ground game, I love Oklahoma to win this game because you do have that home field advantage. Nico Iamaleava, he's never played in an environment like this. And he could be the one who ends up getting rattled with how aggressive Brent Venables is going to be calling this defense. He's going to force Nico Iamaleava to have to show college football just how good he is. And everybody's just quick to anoint Nico Iamaleava as the next great Tennessee quarterback when he really hasn't been tested yet. What's been Tennessee's best opponent before this game? What? NC State? NC State isn't good. They're an 8-9 win team consistently, but they're no Oklahoma. And I'm going to take the Sooners to win this game because, they're a 7-point dog. I love them to cover because they're 13-2 at home. And they beat Texas last year. Texas almost made it to the national championship. They were a playoff team last year. So you already have shown that you're able to beat SEC competition alone just by beating Texas. So if you can beat Texas, then you can beat Tennessee. Tennessee is a really good team. But going on the road and winning in Norman is not as good as what people are making it out to be. Just because Oklahoma comes from the Big 12 and they're playing in the SEC doesn't mean that they're not ready for this level of competition. I think that's a big misconception that most people have when they break down this game. Because you can be a great team in an inferior conference. Oklahoma recruits too well to not be able to show up and give Tennessee a competitive game. Give me the Sooners to win. 24-17 is going to be my final score prediction for this game. I believe that we're going to see that Brent Venables defense that we saw at Clemson, and Nico Iamaleava is going to look human in this game. This isn't Kent State when you can just call onside kick and just get whatever you want to. This Oklahoma team, they got a lot of talent. They are a physical defense. And the biggest issue that they've had the first couple of years under Brent Venables has been fixed. It's been their lack of pass rush and their lack of depth on the interior of that defensive line. They got that fixed now. So look out for the Oklahoma Sooners. I love them to win this game, and I love them to cover. Now, the next game I want to talk about, USC is about to have their first... Start that over. USC versus Michigan. All offseason, I heard a lot of people chirping about how USC isn't ready for the physical brand of football that's going to be played in the Big Ten. Well, we're about to find out if all of the doubters and the haters were right about USC because they're going up against Michigan. And Michigan, they haven't really looked too hot these last couple of weeks, man. They got quarterback issues. They don't have the ability to throw the football. And if USC is the soft West Coast team that a lot of the Big Ten fanboys have been making them out to be, then you would think that Michigan is going to win this game just running the football at will. But I don't believe that's going to happen. And it's unrealistic to see that happening, even if you are a Michigan fan. What made Michigan so good last year wasn't their run game necessarily. It was their ability to play complementary football, being able to run the football and throw the football when need be. They can't do that this year. Davis Warren just got benched. The dude threw 3 interceptions against Arkansas State. Now you're throwing out Alex Orji, and we also don't know if this dude can throw the football. And Michigan also doesn't have a lot of good receivers. As a matter of fact, their best reliable option in the passing game is their tight end, Colson Loveland. If Michigan is going to win this game, you got to be able to dominate on early downs. First and second down, you at least need to get 6-7 yards to put yourself in third and manageable situations, because if you find yourself in third and long, then USC is going to have the advantage of being able to tee off and just get after whoever you got back there at quarterback. And this is not the same USC defense that you've seen the last couple of years under Lincoln Riley. Alex Grinch is gone. You got Deanna Lynn back there, and Deanna Lynn is a really good defensive coordinator. As a matter of fact, he probably is one of the best defensive coordinators in the country because he runs an NFL-style defense. His father, DeAnthony Lynn, was the former head coach for the LA Chargers. Deanna Lynn has spent a lot of time with the Baltimore Ravens. This is an aggressive defense. And if Michigan doesn't get good quarterback play and they think they're just about to ground and pound their way to a win, they're about to get a rude awakening when they play the Trojans in this game, because the Trojans are not a finesse team. They're not soft. This is a physical team now. They can get right with you in the trenches. Michigan's offensive line has regressed. They're not as good as what they've been in years past. You got a USC defensive line that gained the combined total of over 340 total pounds throughout this offseason. This is a team that, if Michigan wants to get physical, they want to test that run defense, they're just about to find out that the Trojans are legit. You know, beating LSU, a lot of Michigan fans have been trying to tell me that LSU is overrated. Well, how do we know if you're not overrated? You got blown the hell out at home by Texas. And that Texas offense, you know, looks exactly similar to the offense that Lincoln Riley's going to be throwing out there. They got a really good offensive line. Have you seen their left tackle? That dude's going to be playing on Sundays. That dude is a mammoth of a left tackle. And Lincoln Riley has always had really productive rushing attacks, and they got a lot of talent on the perimeter. Michigan hasn't seen a wide receiver as dynamic as what a Zachariah Branch is. And you haven't seen a team that has this kind of depth at receiver since you played Texas or Ohio State last year. Now, for USC, you don't want to find yourself getting down early in this game, because if you allow the people in the big house to get into it, then it's going to make things extremely difficult for you offensively when it comes to the communication. And plus, Miller Moss, you know, he's never played in a road environment like this. You know, playing in Ann Arbor, it's a completely different animal, which is why it's important that USC comes out early and they just set the tone fast. Same thing that Texas did. Like, Texas got out to a fast start early, and they just completely took the crowd out of it. That's what USC has to do. Don't allow the home crowd to get into it, because then Michigan's going to be able to feed off that. But Michigan, you know, you have to do way more things to win this game than what USC does, because to be quite frank with you, USC is the better team than what you are right now. You aren't balanced. You don't have the ability to throw the football. And in today's age of college football, if you just plan on being a run-heavy team and you can't just get a little bit of production out of the passing game, then you're handcuffing yourself in every game that you play. USC is unlike any other Big Ten team that you're going to face off against this year. They're not Illinois. They're not a team that doesn't have the ability to spread you out. Wayne Martindale is a really good defensive coordinator, but Lincoln Riley is probably the best offensive mind in the sport. And if your offense can't be efficient and they keep going 3 and out, they can't sustain drives to turn the football over, then your defense is going to be put at a disadvantage, because USC is going to have short fields to work with, which is going to tire out your defense a lot faster. Plus, your defense is going to be on the field for way more plays than what they need to be. Michigan really has to find a way to be able to get some productivity out of their passing attack. I don't know how they're going to do it, because Davis Warren can't throw, Alex Orji can't throw. You really are going to have a difficult time running this football against this USC front. I promise you, this is not the USC defense that you've seen in years past. You know, I was really confused when I saw a Michigan fan in the comment section try to tell me that USC be the overrated LSU team. I don't even think you would be able to beat LSU. You got clobbered by Texas. You can't throw the football at all. Even when you played against inferior competition, Arkansas State, Fresno State, you struggled to throw the football in those games, which is why I'm taking USC to get the win, and I think that USC dominates in this game. I got them winning 34-17 is my final score prediction, and I only think Michigan scores 17 once we get into the fourth quarter in this garbage time, and USC is up 34-7. Because it's hard to win a lot of games against teams that have good offenses when you don't have the ability to throw the football. Regardless of how effective your rushing attack is, you still have to be balanced, and you don't have the ability to do so because you have huge concerns at quarterback. Your quarterback play has been abysmal up to this point in the season. There's no reason to think that that's going to change. And you also don't have the weapons at receiver that help your quarterbacks out. These guys struggle to get off the line. They struggle to create separation. You see, where I would be concerned about USC in this game is if this does end up becoming a one-possession game in the fourth quarter. If USC doesn't at least have a two-possession lead going into the fourth, I would be extremely concerned because then you're still going to allow Michigan to be relying on that ground game. But if you get Michigan down early, then they have to completely abandon the run and they got to throw the football to get back into the game. And that's not the way that Michigan wants to play ball. They want to be able to run the football down your throat and only throw the football when necessary. But you can minimize that early if you get out to a fast start, which I believe USC is going to do. I expect this game to go the same way that Texas game did. It's not really about if Texas is that good, because I don't think Texas got tested against you. And you can call it being disrespectful all you want to, but when you have no quarterback play and you can't throw the football, it's not that hard to beat you. As good as what Texas is, I really think that their win against you is being heavily overrated because you're not that good of a team. I know that you're probably going to be pissed off to hear that if you're a Michigan fan. You're going to come up with all these excuses, but you haven't looked good in any of the games that you won this year against inferior competition. And when you're going up against a team that you know is going to have a solid offense and you don't have the ability to throw the football, how can you possibly expect to win a game like this when you're going up against a defensive coordinator that most people are going to have on the list of head coaching candidates at the end of this season? For all you Big Ten fanboys that were saying that USC was going to get exposed by the Big Ten, they were too soft, they weren't going to be able to handle the physicality of this conference, USC is about to prove why a lot of you guys were really wrong about them and why you guys aren't as good as a conference as what you think. This is a conference that's all about bully ball, but nobody really has a dynamic offense as what Lincoln Riley is about to show you in this game. And I can't wait. I really can't. I've been telling y'all all this offseason what was going to happen. And USC beat LSU. They blew out whoever. I think they played Utah State in week 2. You know, Michigan hasn't really dominated anybody. They struggled in a lot of their games because of how inept they've been throwing the football. USC is about to roll in this game, and they're about to make a statement to the Big Ten that, hey, we're here. We're not this soft team from the West Coast that you thought we were. We're physical too. We got the ability to play a physical brand of football. We got the ability to run the football if we want to. We got the ability to slow down your run game if we want to as well. You know, we can play defense too this year. For all you Big Ten fanboys, this is the game where you find out that these boys from the West Coast aren't as soft as what you thought. USC is about to dominate Michigan, and the Wolverines are once again about to get embarrassed in the big house. USC is about to come into their trap and take over their trap and walk out with a W. Meanwhile, Michigan is still going to find themselves searching for answers. Shout out to everybody in the chat. Shout out to my guy Dubs, the money man. He says, we will beat Michigan. Their offense is anemic. Shout out to Cuban Kane. He says, what's up, JT? What's up to everybody in the chat? Let's keep moving on. LSU fans are in extreme denial about Brian Kelly. They barely were able to beat South Carolina. South Carolina ran for over 243 yards over this defense. And the same issues that LSU had defensively the past 2 years, they still have with their new defensive coordinator, Blake Baker. And Brian Kelly has lost 5 out of his last 6 games against ranked teams. These two issues are a big reason why LSU is once again going to underachieve with Brian Kelly as their head coach. You are not going to win more than 8 games, and you're not going to be a playoff team. So I made a segment a few days ago about how South Carolina exposed LSU, because I really believe South Carolina lost that game more than LSU won it due to how bad the refs were in that game and due to how South Carolina just imploded on themselves. You know, when I watch LSU play, I don't see a team that is always that buttoned up or that well coached. And anytime that Brian Kelly ends up, getting put into these big game situations, more times than not, he ends up coming up short and he ends up making excuses. And I get that playing in the SEC is not easy, especially when you got to go on the road into an environment like South Carolina. But at the end of the day, though, you were expected to win that game a little bit more convincingly than what you did. And you can't compare you barely beating South Carolina to Georgia barely beating Kentucky, because it's like comparing apples to oranges. You see, Georgia can get the benefit of a doubt, because last year they barely beat Auburn and they still went 12-1 and lost to Alabama in the SEC championship. What has Brian Kelly done throughout his time in LSU to show that he deserves the benefit of a doubt? The same issues that you've had defensively these last couple of years are still prevalent this year. You still can't stop the run, and your defense is still giving up 20-something, 30 points per game. You gave up 27 against USC. You gave up 33 against a South Carolina offense that really isn't that good. The only thing South Carolina can do is run the football. Lenore Sellers was killing you on the ground, and the same thing with Rocket Sanders. He was slicing and dicing your defense up through the ground. So if your defense is still as bad as what it was last year, how are you going to be able to be a playoff team this year? How are you going to be able to get the 9 wins? Where do you see 9 wins on LSU's schedule? I can't see LSU beating none of the elite teams in the SEC this year. And what LSU fans have to understand is that there are more coaches in this conference now that are better than what they were than when Brian Kelly first took this job. When Brian Kelly got to LSU, you didn't have Kalen DeBoer or Mike Elko in this conference. Those are 2 coaches that did more with less at their previous programs. Brian Kelly left Notre Dame because he felt that he was somewhat handicapped at Notre Dame due to how tough it is to bring in the required level of talent to win a national championship. So he goes to LSU, a team that has superior resources, where it's easier to recruit, because he believes that LSU gives him the best chance to win it all. But so far, we've seen this dude underachieve when he had 3 first-rounders on his roster last year. Jaden Daniels, who won the Heisman Trophy, Malik Neighbors, and Brian Thomas Jr., and yet you didn't even make it to the conference title game, despite the majority of people picking you to do so last year. But yet, LSU fans continue to make excuses. They continue to finger point. They want to say, well, this team barely beat so-and-so. Alabama barely beat USF. Georgia barely beat Kentucky. You can't use other teams as an example to justify your shortcomings, because those teams, based off history, they've shown the ability to bounce back despite having close wins. You haven't. Brian Kelly has lost 5 out of his last 6 games against ranked teams. What does that show about Brian Kelly? You lost to USC in week 1. You barely beat South Carolina. You're barely skating by. We know that Georgia is going to bounce back. Because Kirby Smart has won 2 natties at Georgia. Brian Kelly hasn't won anything at LSU. There's no reason to believe that Brian Kelly is going to be able to win it all at LSU based off how this team has underachieved under him these first couple of years in his tenure. And you play UCLA this week. That's going to be a get-right game for you. You're going to blow them out, and then once you get into conference play again, you're about to get a brutal reality check because this team defensively is still as bad as what they were last year. You get to play UCLA, South Alabama these next couple of weeks, and then you get to play Ole Miss at home. You're going to lose to Ole Miss. Ole Miss is a better team than what you are. They got a good defense, and they got a great offense, and Lane Kiffin is a better head coach than what Brian Kelly is. You know, you got to play Arkansas. There's no guarantee you're going to win that game with how Bobby Petrino has that offense looking. And then you got to play Texas A&M on the road, and then you host Kalen DeBoer and Alabama. It's hard to envision LSU winning more than 7-8 games this year. Brian Kelly is about to get exposed this year. You LSU fans keep making excuses for the same problems that you've had for the last 2-3 years. The defense still hasn't been fixed. The red zone play calling still isn't that good. And the run game, although it has improved, it still isn't consistent as what it needs to be to win in this conference with Brian Kelly as your head coach. Why can't y'all just accept the fact that Brian Kelly is overrated? I can name 5 head coaches right now that I would take over Brian Kelly. Steve Sarkisian, Kalen DeBoer, Kirby Smart, Lane Kiffin, and I would take Mike Elko over Brian Kelly. You are not a well-coached football team. You are undisciplined, and critical moments of the game, you have costly penalties. And then once you get into the red zone, you know you got really crappy play calling. Too many LSU fans want to just make excuses and try to deflect blame and try to finger point other teams' shortcomings instead of looking at your shortcomings that you have under Brian Kelly. Last year, you should have made it to the playoffs. Most people picked you to win the SEC West last year over Alabama. Remember, everybody thought that Alabama was finished. Their time was up because they didn't have the quarterback situation situated. Well, I mean, you can say the same thing for LSU this year. Garrett Nussmeier didn't look too hot against South Carolina, and I'm a big fan of Garrett Nussmeier, but his decision-making was really questionable. He had 2 pick sixes that got called back due to the terrible officiating that we saw in that game. You won that game due to a technicality. Because right now, you really shouldn't have the record that you have at this moment. You really should have 2 losses. You got bailed out because of the refs. The refs saved you in that game. You know, I get that playing in the SEC is tough, and every once in a while, an elite team will have a stinker in there, but the key is being able to win those games. You know, Brian Kelly consistently doesn't have LSU ready to play in these big-time games, which is reflected by him losing 5 out of his last 6 against top 25 teams. Eventually, you LSU fans are going to have to wake up, open your eyes, and realize that Brian Kelly is not the coach that you think he is. When he was at Notre Dame, he was a big fish in a small pond. Now he's in the SEC. He's looking like a smarter difference now than what they were a few years ago when he first took this job. And I really don't see LSU having that good of a season this year. I think that they are severely lacking a lot of talent on defense, especially on the interior, which is why you got carved up for 243 rushing yards. Like, when you're going up against a team like South Carolina and you know that all they can do is run the football effectively, and yet you still can't stop it, that's a problem. Your offensive line was getting pushed around by South Carolina's defensive line. You know, there are a lot of red flags with this year's LSU team that LSU fans just want to ignore and try to defend Brian Kelly instead of realizing and coming to the realization that this dude just isn't a good head coach anymore. He's overrated. Well, is he rated? He's not a top 10 coach like how most people label him as. Y'all about to find out as we progress throughout this season more and more that Brian Kelly is not the dude in Baton Rouge, and his hot seat is about to get a little bit hot once we get past these two easy wins that you get against South Alabama and UCLA, like, I wish you guys would stop scheduling these cupcakes, man. Play some better teams. You barely beat Nicholls State. I mean, yeah, you pulled away in the second half, but in the first half, that was a little bit of a competitive game, man. They were having some pretty good drives when they were able to sustain like 10, 11 play drives, take 6-7 minutes off the clock. Like, there are a lot of issues with this LSU team that fans continue to deny because Brian Kelly is their head coach. You still think that Brian Kelly is something that he isn't anymore, which is an elite head coach. And you're about to find out as we progress throughout this season, week by week, why Brian Kelly is never going to win a national championship at LSU. This dude is overrated, and he's a major fraud, and he is holding back this program. You barely beat South Carolina. You got exposed in that game because that game showed that the same issues that you've had defensively these last couple of years still are prevalent this year, and nothing has changed that much despite having a new defensive staff and having Blake Baker as your defensive coordinator. All right. Trying to see if we got anything else left to talk about. Oh, yeah. This is the last thing. Florida State and Florida are struggling right now. They are down bad, and a lot of people from a national standpoint have a hard time understanding why FSU football and the Florida Gators football programs are struggling despite having access to all this great talent in the state of Florida when it comes to recruiting. And here's the thing. When you are as bad as what Florida State and Florida have been over these last couple of years, it's hard to keep these in-state recruits from going out of the state and playing for schools like Georgia, Alabama, and Ohio State, who have shown the ability to get these guys to the NFL and to be able to give them a national championship. FSU and Florida haven't been national championship contenders in over a decade, which is why they're having a hard time keeping the best players in this state. It's the same problem that USC has had. You know, with how bad USC has been prior to the arrival of Lincoln Riley, some of their best California talent has went to other schools like Bryce Young. Instead of going to USC, despite being at Modern Day has always been a pipeline for USC, he went to Alabama. The reasoning for that is because there's no reason for him to want to stay in the same state with how bad that biggest program has been. And when you look at FSU and Florida, both of them are struggling for two different reasons. Florida State is struggling because, for one, they're not recruiting the state as good as what they need to be. Under Mike Norvell, they're recruiting decent, but they're not recruiting as good as what they were in the prime days of the Jimbo Fisher era. As bad as how things ended for Jimbo Fisher down there in Tallahassee, his recruiting classes were mostly inside the top 5, top 10 the majority of years. Under Mike Norvell, it seems like you're consistently finishing outside the top 10 in recruiting. And the problem with Florida State this season is that they've overly relied on the transfer portal instead of consistently recruiting at a high enough level to be able to not have to lean on the portal. The portal is only an asset that you use when you got a few positions that you need to address. Let's say that you got a hole at right tackle and a hole at corner. You can go into the transfer portal and get a couple of guys to fill those needs. It's not one of those things that you just solely rely upon to completely build a team. Now, with how bad Florida State has been this year, it's going to take them at least 2 years to rebuild to get back to the level that they were last season when they won the ACC championship and they went undefeated in the regular season. Because this season sets you back. With all these transfer portal guys, they got to leave, and now you got to re-step up your recruiting efforts, and then you got to develop those guys, wait for them to get into their sophomore, junior years to actually be able to make a run again, because you're not good at developing in-house talent, which is why you got to lean on the portal. That's why things have gone so awry for Florida State. That's why they got no culture. That's why they're missing so many tackles on defense. That's why they're not physical. They lack soul. They lack toughness. Because when you got players that don't have no skin in the game, that only view you as an opportunity versus viewing you as a program that they want to make better. When you got Jordan Travis, even though you got him from the transfer portal, he wasn't just a one-and-done guy. He was a guy who came in, you developed him for 3 to 4 years, and he became a great quarterback for you. And during that time, he developed such a love and admiration for Florida State to the point where he gave his all to make this program better. With all these transfers you have in, they don't have that same admiration for your program. They view you as a stepping stone to get to the next level. They're not willing to sacrifice what it takes to make Florida State great again. That's why you had all those opt-outs in the bowl game against Georgia when you got blown out. When Alabama missed the playoffs, when they lost 2 games and they had Bryce Young and Will Anderson, those guys played. You want to know why? Because they didn't want to leave Alabama without going out on top, regardless if it was in the playoffs or in the bowl game. And Alabama has never had any of their big-time players ever opt out of the bowl game. I remember when they blew out Michigan a few years ago in the bowl game. And it wasn't even like a big-time bowl game. I believe it was like the Outback Bowl or the Citrus Bowl or something like that. And they had Jerry Jeudy, Najee Harris, all those boys were playing because they loved Nick Saban and they loved Alabama football. All those dudes they recruited, they didn't get out of the transfer portal. And the problem with Florida State is that their culture is so messed up right now due to leaning on the transfer portal too much, not recruiting at the level that they should be. Florida State should always be having a top 10 recruiting class year after year. Florida State is a prestigious program. Even though I'm a Miami fan, I can admit that FSU is a program that is rooted in tradition. Their history goes far back since before I even came out the womb. And yet people don't look at Florida State the same way that they used to. Now, when you look at Florida on the other hand, Florida just has completely bad coaching. Billy Napier belongs in the Sun Belt. He's not a head coach who's built to be coaching at a P4 program, especially at the toughest conference in college football, which is the SEC. And Florida also hasn't recruited as well as what they should. Like FSU, they've recruited on the outside looking in of the top 10. Because it's hard to incentivize people to want to play for a program that hasn't really made any progress. I get that progress isn't always linear, but at least Mike Norvell, his first 3 seasons at FSU, they improved every single season record-wise prior to this year. Well, Florida, They made it to a bowl game year 1 under Billy Napier, and ever since it's been downhill. With how bad Billy Napier has been at being able to get the most out of his talent, being able to develop his guys, there's no reason for recruits to want to play for Florida. Florida football hasn't been what it used to be when you think of the glory days of Tim Tebow and Urban Meyer. And the reason why I wanted to talk about this is because I saw Colin Cowherd make a tweet where he doesn't understand why FSU and Florida are so bad despite having so much access to the in-state talent that resides in Florida when it comes to recruiting. And I would tell you, Colin, it's the same reason why a lot of the top players out of California have left to go play for other schools in the South instead of playing for USC. Because when a program like USC that used to be dominant isn't dominant anymore and they fall off, it's hard to retain some of the best players inside that state. A lot of those Ohio State, Georgia, and Alabama teams that have won national championships, they've done it with a good amount of players from the state of Florida. Imagine if Jerry Jeudy would have came to Miami. Think about all of the great talent that's left the South Florida area that could have been playing for the Miami Hurricanes, but they opted to go elsewhere because they didn't believe that they were going to receive the proper development. It's hard to get recruits to come play for you when you're not having the on-the-field results that you need to give recruits confidence that, hey, staying in state is the right decision for me. They rather go play for OSU and Alabama or Georgia where they know they're going to have a great chance at being able to get developed and prepare for the next level. When's the last time FSU and Florida had put first-round picks in the NFL. It wasn't until this past year, and the first-round picks that they put into the league weren't even guys that they recruited. They were guys out of the transfer portal. Jared Verse was a transfer portal guy. You know, Ricky Pearsall was a transfer portal guy. It's been a while since Florida recruited somebody out of high school that was a first-round pick not named Anthony Richardson. That's really the only one you can think of. That's about it. So until these programs start competing for the SEC again, which is Florida, and FSU is able to sustain the level of success that they had last year, and they go back to being a consistent 10, 11 win program, you're going to continue to see these teams struggle to keep some of the best in-state talent inside of this state, getting them to commit to their universities with how inconsistent they've been over these last couple of years. And the same thing goes for Miami. But Miami isn't struggling right now like those schools are. Miami has actually out-recruited both Florida and Florida State. Mario Cristobal, as much flack as what people give him for being a head coach, he's a damn good recruiter. So until FSU and Florida can start giving recruits a reason to believe and come into their program, they're going to continue to allow these players to leave the state. You got to incentivize these players to want to stay home. And FSU and Florida aren't giving them a lot of reasons to do so. This is it for this episode of the JT Sports Podcast. I appreciate you guys for tuning in. Leave a like, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Give us a 5-star review on Apple and Spotify if you enjoyed